When someone asks about your childhood and you suddenly freeze, like the answer just isn't there, not because it was terrible and not because nothing happened, but because somewhere between the ages of 7 and 17, it feels like you skipped a few chapters of your life. That strange gap is what we're talking about today. There's something that happens when childhood ends earlier than it's supposed to. And I'm not talking about some dramatic movie moment. Sometimes it's much quieter than that. It could be making dinner for your younger siblings at the age of 9 while your parent works a double shift. It could be becoming the translator during your parents' arguments, or learning to read the emotional atmosphere in a room long before you ever learn to read a chapter book. One thing that doesn't get talked about enough is this. The version of you who had to grow up too fast never truly disappears. That part of you still influences the way you think, the way you react, and the way you make decisions, even today. Imagine an 8-year-old child who suddenly becomes the most responsible person in their household, not because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. In that moment, something inside them shifts. Psychologists call this parentification, a situation where a child takes on roles and responsibilities that should belong to adults. But the clinical term doesn't fully capture what that feels like. It doesn't capture the emotional weight of being so small while carrying something far bigger than you. Research by psychologist Dr. Lisa M. Hooper shows that children who experience parentification often appear incredibly mature for their age. But here's the important part. It isn't actually maturity. It's a survival adaptation. It's a child's nervous system learning to operate in crisis mode as its default setting. What felt normal to you back then was often someone else's crisis. Many people who grow up this way become exceptionally skilled at certain things. They learn to read people's emotions with incredible accuracy. They can sense someone's mood the moment they walk into the room. They anticipate other people's needs before those needs are even spoken. Problem solving becomes second nature, because growing up, there was rarely another option. But these abilities, these superpowers, often come with a hidden cost. Interestingly, people who had to grow up too fast can handle major life crises surprisingly well, but the smallest things can feel the hardest. Asking for help, resting without guilt, being playful or carefree, those things can feel uncomfortable, even unsafe. That's because early in life, you learned that the world wouldn't stop for your needs. You learned that stability depended on your ability to hold everything together. Over time, this didn't just become a habit, it became an entire operating system that your mind still runs on today. In adulthood, this often shows up in familiar patterns. You become the person everyone turns to during a crisis, the reliable one, the fixer. You might find yourself attracted to people who need help or saving, not because you have a savior complex, but because being needed feels like love. It's the only version of love you learn to recognize. Relationships can become complicated too. Vulnerability can feel risky, because growing up, emotional openness wasn't always safe. So even when you're with someone who genuinely cares about you, there may still be a part of you that struggles to let your guard down. Sometimes this even leads to being drawn toward emotionally unavailable partners. And before blaming yourself for that pattern, it helps to understand something important. Emotional unavailability can feel strangely familiar. It can feel like home. Control also becomes a big theme, not necessarily in a toxic way, but as a deep need to manage every possible variable. When unpredictability once meant chaos or danger, planning and overthinking become protective strategies. People might label this as perfectionism or anxiety, but underneath it all is simply a child who learned that letting go had consequences. The exhaustion that comes with this is very real. It's that deep, bone-level tiredness that sleep alone can't fix. When your nervous system has been running in high alert since childhood, your body never truly learned what safe rest feels like. Another complex part of this experience is the relationship with success. Many people who grow up too fast achieve impressive things, but no matter how much they accomplish, it rarely feels like enough. There's always that quiet voice pushing for more proof, more validation. And strangely enough, society often rewards this behavior. The world tends to admire people who grew up too fast. They're productive, independent, reliable, and low maintenance, but rarely does anyone stop to ask what it cost them to become that way. Over time, people like this become fluent in something most others never have to learn: emotional labor. They can sense tension in a room before anyone else notices it. They know how to smooth over conflict, comfort others, and maintain harmony, even while struggling inside themselves. And because this becomes automatic, they might not even realize how much energy it takes. That's why many people who grew up too fast often feel alone, even when surrounded by friends, family, or coworkers. Not alone in the obvious sense, but alone in the sense that nobody fully sees how much effort they put into holding everything together. So the real question becomes, what do you do with all of this? How do you heal from something that doesn't look like traditional trauma? Because it wasn't one dramatic event, it was hundreds of small moments where you had to be strong when you should have been protected. The first step is allowing yourself to grieve. And yes, that word might sound dramatic, but the loss is real. You're grieving the childhood you didn't get to fully experience, the version of you who could have been messy, carefree, needy, and still deeply loved. Acknowledging that truth doesn't make you bitter, it makes you honest. The next step is learning something incredibly difficult. Being needed is not the same as being valued. Your worth is not measured by what you produce or how well you manage everyone else's emotions. You are not a human doing, you are a human being, and simply being is enough. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to not have all the answers. You're allowed to fall apart sometimes and to receive care without having to earn it first. And perhaps most importantly, you're allowed to be a beginner at being taken care of. Even if you're 30, 40, or 50 years old, it's still okay to learn that skill now. That child who grew up too fast did an incredible job holding everything together. They were strong, resourceful, and brave beyond words. But they don't have to carry everything anymore. It's safe now to let someone else hold the weight sometimes. It's safe to soften, to breathe, and to rediscover the parts of yourself that never had the chance to fully grow. You've been holding on so tightly. Maybe the real question now is this: what would it feel like to finally let go?